My stepfather rode my severely injured horse until her spine snapped, just so he could cash in a fraudulent life insurance policy and sue me for $500,000. I am Sophie, and I am writing this with shaking hands because I just sent the man who destroyed our lives to prison. Yet I feel like I am the one serving a sentence. Mark came into our home not as a father figure, but as a predator looking for a payday. He looked at Sarah, my suffering horse, and saw a quick way to pay off his gambling debts. He crushed her to death, faked his own paralysis in a wheelchair, and convinced my own mother to turn against me. They wanted to take our farm, our dignity, and our future. I had to make a choice between being a good daughter and being a ruthless survivor. I did not just defend myself, I hunted him down. I exposed his lies. I destroyed his marriage, and I left my mother homeless on the street with nothing but her regrets. But now that the adrenaline has faded, the silence in the farmhouse is deafening. I won the war, but I feel like I have lost my soul in the process. Did I take justice too far? Or was this the only way to save my family from a monster? I really need to know. What would you have done in my place? My name is Sophie Bennett. Most people around here just call me Soph. I am 17 years old, a senior in high school, and currently the unofficial co-manager of a failing thoroughbred farm on the outskirts of Lexington, Kentucky. If you looked at my social media, you might think I live a rustic, dreamlike existence. Golden hour selfies in the paddock, the wind in my hair, the romanticized struggle of country life. But the truth is much sharper, much colder, and it smells less like wildflowers and more like despair and horse liniment. I live with my father, David. He is a man carved out of the same limestone that sits beneath our pastures, hard, silent, and slowly eroding under the pressure of the elements. We used to have 6 staff members. Now, it is just him and me. My mother, Linda, left 5 years ago when the first wave of financial trouble hit. She did not just leave. She escaped, reinventing herself in the city, chasing a lifestyle she could never afford with a man she barely knew. That brings us to the center of my universe, Sarah. Sarah is not a person. She is a 4-year-old chestnut mare, a direct descendant of Secretariat, with a coat that gleams like polished copper even in the dim light of the barn. She was supposed to be our savior. One major win at the Breeders' Cup, and the prize money would have wiped out the mortgage, the vet bills, and the crushing silence at our dinner table. But 3 months ago, Sarah took a bad fall during training, a hairline fracture in her lumbar vertebrae, a broken spine. Essentially, the vet said she might recover enough to breed, preserving that $1 million bloodline. But her racing days were over. Now, she is a fragile queen in a crumbling castle, requiring 24-hour care, expensive supplements, and absolute stillness. For the last 90 days, our lives have revolved around her breath, her stride, and her pain management. It was a quiet, suffocating kind of peace. Just me, Dad, and the soft rhythmic chewing of hay in the stall. Then, the peace was shattered. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the gravel in our driveway crunched under the tires of a rental car that was trying too hard to look luxurious. It was a shiny black sedan, starkly out of place against the faded red paint of our barn. I was in the tack room, cleaning a bridle, when I saw them step out. My mother, Linda. I looked different. Her hair was dyed a blonde so bright it looked aggressive, and she wore heels that sank immediately into the Kentucky mud. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the property like she was appraising it for an auction. And then there was Mark, my stepfather. I had only met him twice before, brief encounters that left a greasy film on my soul. He was a large man, heavy-set, not with muscle but with the kind of soft, expansive weight that comes from too many business dinners and not enough manual labor. He wore a suit jacket that strained at the buttons, and even from 50 feet away, he projected an aura of unearned importance. He walked with a swagger, chest puffed out, surveying our land as if he had already conquered it. "Sophie," my mother shrieked, her voice pitched an octave too high. "Oh, look at you. You look Saoyuting. 2 is greater than robust." I did not smile. I just wiped the leather grease from my hands onto my jeans. "Hi, Mom?" Mark did not say hello. He did not ask how I was. He did not ask where Dad was. Instead, he walked right past me, his eyes fixed on the main barn. "So, this is the money pit." "Huh?" Mark's voice was loud, booming, lacking any indoor filter. He laughed, a wet, guttural sound. "Your mom tells me you guys are sitting on a gold mine if you just knew how to manage assets properly." My stomach tightened. That was the first red flag. The word assets, to Mark, nothing was alive. Everything was just a number on a spreadsheet he had not written. Dad walked out of the barn then, looking exhausted, wiping sweat from his forehead. He froze when he saw them. "Linda," Dad said, his voice flat. "Mark, we were not expecting you until the weekend." "Surprise." Mark spread his arms wide, encompassing the air around him. "We thought we would come early. Check out the investment. I mean, the family home." He winked at me. It made my skin crawl. "We are just here to support you." "David," Mom added quickly, grabbing Mark's arm as if to restrain him, or perhaps to steady herself. "Mark has had some wonderful business ideas lately. We thought, Saoyuting, 2 is greater than well. We thought we could help you restructure." "Restructure," I repeated under my breath. The inner monologue in my head was screaming. "They are not here to help. They are sharks smelling blood in the water." "Where is the beast?" Mark asked, ignoring the tension thick enough to choke on. "The $1 million horse. Sarah, right? I want to see what all the fuss is about." "She is resting," I said, stepping in front of the barn door. My protective instinct flared up, hot and sharp. "She is in critical recovery. No visitors. No loud noises." Mark chuckled, a condescending sound that vibrated in his chest. He stepped closer to me, invading my personal space. I could smell his cologne, something musky and cheap, trying to mask the scent of stale cigarettes. "Relax, sweetheart," he said, and the pet name sounded like an insult. "I am family, and technically, since I am married to your mother, and your mother's name is still on some of these deeds, Saoyuting, 2 is greater than, I think I have a right to inspect the property. Do not be so sensitive." He pushed past me. He did not shove me, not physically, but the force of his entitlement was a physical blow. He walked into the barn, his dress shoes clicking loudly on the concrete aisle. I looked at Dad. Dad looked at the ground. His jaw clenched so tight I saw the muscle feather. He was too tired to fight. He was beaten down by the banks, by the vet bills, and he did not have the energy to fight a man like Mark. I turned and followed Mark into the shadows of the barn. He was standing in front of Sarah's stall. Sarah, sensing a stranger, pinned her ears back and let out a low, Warning snort. Mark did not back off. He leaned over the gate, staring at her not with awe, but with calculation. Does not look like much, Mark said, turning to me with a smirk. For something worth 6 figures. She looks like expensive dog food waiting to happen. I felt a coldness settle in my chest, a stark contrast to the heat of my anger. He was not joking. I looked at his hands gripping the stall door, thick, manicured fingers digging into the wood. He looked at Sarah the way a butcher looks at a side of beef. She is a living creature, I said, my voice trembling slightly. And she is injured. She is an asset. Mark corrected me, his eyes cold and dead. And assets need to perform, or they get liquidated. At that moment, standing in the dusty light of the barn, I knew this was not a family visit. This was an invasion. And the man standing in front of my horse's stall was more dangerous than any broken bone or bank foreclosure. The invasion of our home did not happen all at once. It happened in slow, agonizing increments, like water seeping into the cracks of a foundation before the freeze sets in. By the second day, the air in the farmhouse felt heavy, thick with the scent of Mark's cheap musk and the tension radiating from my father's hunched shoulders. Mark had already claimed the head of the dinner table. He sat there with a fork in one hand and a stack of my father's financial ledgers in the other, grease from his bacon dripping dangerously close to the ink. He was not just a guest. He was an auditor, and we were failing the inspection. You really should digitize these records, David, Mark said, chewing with his mouth open. This is why you are bleeding money. You are living in the Stone Age. My father, David, stared at his plate. He looked smaller than I had ever seen him. He was a man who could calm a 2,000-pound stallion with a whisper. Yet he seemed unable to find his voice against this man who wore loafers in a barn. I gripped my orange juice glass so hard I thought it might shatter. Say something. Dad, I thought, tell him to get his grease-covered fingers off our livelihood. But Dad just nodded, murmuring something about tradition and old ways. After breakfast, I escaped to the barn. The barn was my sanctuary, the only place where the rules made sense. But as I walked down the center aisle, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. The silence was wrong. Sarah was usually quiet, but this was the silence of held breath. I turned the corner to Sarah's stall and froze. We had placed bright red tape across the entrance to her stall. We had posted a laminated sign that read, "Absolute rest. Do not disturb. Do not touch." The instructions were clear enough for a child to understand. Mark was standing inside the stall. He had ducked under the red tape. He was standing right next to Sarah's left flank, the exact spot where her vertebrae were knitting back together. Sarah's ears were pinned flat against her skull, her eyes wide and rolling, showing the whites. She was trembling, shifting her weight nervously, trapped in the corner of her box. Mark was not just looking at her. His hand was resting heavily on her back, right over the injury site. "Get out," I screamed. The sound tore out of my throat before I could check myself. I dropped the feed bucket I was carrying, and the clatter echoed like a gunshot in the metal-roofed barn. Mark jumped, but he did not step away. He turned to look at me, his expression shifting from surprise to annoyance. He did not look guilty. He looked inconvenienced. "Jesus. Sophie," he snapped. "Do you have to screech like a banshee? You nearly gave me a heart attack. Get away from her." I rushed forward, unlatching the gate and swinging it open. "You are not supposed to be in here. Look at the sign. She is injured. You are scaring her. I placed myself between him and the mare, using my body as a shield. Up close, I could see the sweat on Sarah's neck. She was in pain. Even his hand, resting there, added pressure she could not handle. Mark rolled his eyes and stepped back, dusting his hands on his pants as if Sarah were covered in filth. I was just petting her, he said, his voice dripping with that oily, patronizing tone he used whenever he wanted to make me feel small. I am an animal lover, Sophie. I was sending her some healing energy. You are so dramatic. He was gaslighting me, standing right there in the sawdust. He was trying to rewrite the reality I had just witnessed. You were pushing on her back, I accused him, my voice shaking with rage. I saw you. She has a spinal fracture. Mark, do you know what happens if she moves the wrong way? We lose her. Mark laughed. It was a short, dismissive bark. It is a horse, not a porcelain doll, he said. And frankly, with the amount of money your father is pouring into this glue factory, I have a right to inspect the merchandise. Merchandise, that word again. He did not see a living soul behind those brown eyes. He saw a line item. He saw a potential insurance payout. Suddenly, my mother appeared at the barn entrance. She must have heard me yelling. She hurried over, her heels clicking on the concrete, looking between Mark and me with wide, panicked eyes. What is going on? Linda asked. Why are you shouting at Mark? Mom, he was in the stall, I said, pointing an accusing finger at him. He was touching Sarah's back. He ignored the signs. Linda looked at Mark. For a second, just a split second, I thought she might defend me. I thought the mother who used to braid my hair and take me to writing lessons would surface. But then Mark said, a long, weary sound that suggested he was the victim of a great injustice. I was just trying to bond with the animal. Linda, Mark said, spreading his hands in a gesture of innocence. I wanted to see if I could help, but your daughter, Saoyudzing howling, 2 hashes greater than she flew off the handle. She acts like I am some kind of monster. I think she is still angry that you remarried. It was a masterclass in manipulation. He took my legitimate concern for the horse's safety and twisted it into a teenage tantrum about a step-parent. Linda's face hardened. She turned to me, her lips pressed into a thin line. Sophie, apologize to Mark, she said. I stared at her, unable to process the betrayal. What? He is trying to be part of this family, Linda said, her voice rising. He is trying to take an interest in your hobbies. And you treat him like a criminal? You have become so bitter. Sophie, it is ugly. My hobbies? Saving a life was a hobby? I am not apologizing, I said, my voice low and cold. He broke the rules. He put Sarah in danger. Mark put an arm around my mother's shoulders, pulling her close. See, he whispered to her, loud enough for me to hear. She is irrational. I told you. Linda, teens these days are entitled. They think they own the world. My mother looked at me with disappointment that stung worse than a slap. Come on, Mark, let us go back to the house. Clearly, we are not welcome in the barn. They turned and walked away, leaving me standing in the sawdust with a trembling horse. Mark glanced back over his shoulder once. He did not look upset. He looked smug. He had won the territory skirmish. He had proven that he could cross my boundaries, endanger my horse, and still come out as the victim. I turned to Sarah and stroked her nose, feeling her hot breath against my palm. It is okay, girl, I whispered, though I did not believe it myself. I am here, But inside, my inner monologue was dark and venomous. He is testing the waters. He touched her back to see how much she would react. He wanted to know how broken she really is. I grabbed a roll of duct tape and reinforced the sign on the stall door, adding 3 more layers of tape. It felt like a futile gesture, like trying to stop a flood with a paper towel. The enemy was not at the gate anymore. The enemy was sleeping in the guest bedroom, eating our food, and whispering poison into my mother's ear. And my father was nowhere to be found. The silence that fell over the farm after my father's truck disappeared down the driveway was heavy and unnerving. It was Thursday, 2 days after the incident in the stall, and the atmosphere in the house had been toxic. Dad had left to make an emergency run into town for specialized anti-inflammatory medication and a new batch of alfalfa cubes for Sarah. He looked gray and defeated as he climbed into his battered pickup, telling me he would be back in 2 hours. I watched the dust settle on the road, a knot of anxiety tightening in my stomach. I was alone. My mother had gone to the nail salon in the city, claiming the country air was drying out her cuticles, leaving me on the property with Mark. He had been lurking around the house all morning, drinking my father's bourbon straight from the bottle and watching television at a volume that shook the floorboards. I decided to stay in the barn. It was safer there. I busied myself with scrubbing water buckets, the rhythmic swish of the brush providing a temporary distraction from the intruder in our lives. The barn was peaceful. Dust motes danced in the shafts of afternoon sunlight cutting through the slats. Sarah was resting in her stall, her head low, heavily sedated from the morning's pain medication. I checked on her every 10 minutes, whispering soft reassurances, telling her that we just had to survive this visit, and then things would go back to normal. I was wrong. I had gone to the feed room at the far end of the barn to mix her evening mash. The heavy wooden door was closed to keep the raccoons out. The noise of the mixer was loud, a grinding drone that masked the world outside. I let it run for 5 minutes, lost in my own thoughts about how to convince Dad to kick them out. When I turned the mixer off, the silence returned. But then, a sound cut through the air that made my blood freeze in my veins. It was not a neigh. It was not a whinny. It was a shriek, a high-pitched, guttural scream of pure terror and agony that only a horse in mortal distress can make. I dropped the feed scoop. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. I sprinted out of the feed room, my boots slamming against the concrete aisle. "Sarah," I screamed as I rounded the corner to the main block of stalls. The scene before me caused my brain to short-circuit. I could not comprehend what I was seeing because it was too horrific, too stupid, too cruel to be real. The red warning tape I had reinforced with duct tape was ripped down, fluttering uselessly on the floor. The stall door was wide open. Inside, Sarah was tied short to the hay rack, her head forced high so she could not move away. Her eyes were rolling back in her head, wild with panic. Foam was already dripping from her lips. And Mark was there. He had dragged a mounting block into the stall. He was wearing his ridiculous designer loafers and jeans that were far too tight. He had thrown an old exercise saddle, one that did not even fit her, onto her back. He had not even bothered to put a saddle pad underneath. He was standing on the mounting block, his left foot jammed into the stirrup. His hands were gripping her mane, pulling it so hard I could see the skin stretching on her neck. "Mark, no," I shrieked, my voice cracking. "Get down." He looked over at me, his face flushed and sweaty. He did not look ashamed. He looked annoyed that I had interrupted him. "Quit your yelling," he grunted, heaving his massive bulk upward. I am just taking her for a little spin. A horse is made to be ridden. You guys are babying her into uselessness. He was trying to hoist himself up. Mark was a large man, easily 250 pounds of dead weight. As he pulled himself up, the saddle slipped sideways, digging into Sarah's withers. I scrambled over the gate, not bothering to unlatch it. I lunged at him, grabbing the back of his shirt. She has a broken spine, I screamed, tearing at his clothes. You are killing her. Get off. He swung his elbow back, catching me hard in the shoulder. It sent me stumbling back into the wall. Get off me, you little brat, he roared. I am the man of this house now, and I will ride whatever animal I please. He ignored me. He ignored the horse's groans. With one final, grunt-filled heave, he threw his right leg over her back and slammed his full weight down into the saddle. The sound that followed will haunt me for the rest of my life. It was a wet, sickening crack, like a dry branch snapping under a heavy boot, but magnified 1,000 times. It came from deep inside Sarah's body. Sarah did not buck. She did not rear. She simply collapsed. Her hind legs gave out instantly, as if they had been severed from her body. She went down hard, her rear end hitting the sawdust with a thud that shook the ground. Her front legs scrabbled frantically for purchase, her hooves sparking against the stone wall, but her back half was paralyzed. Mark, who had been sitting tall and proud a second ago, was thrown backward by the sudden collapse. He flailed in the air, a look of comical surprise on his face, before he landed flat on his back in the aisle. Half in and half out of the stall, I did not look at him. I scrambled on my hands and knees to Sarah's head. She was thrashing, her front legs paddling the air, trying to stand up, but her back legs were dead weight. She was making a low, moaning sound with every breath. Her eyes were wide, fixed on something I could not see. Sarah, no, 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 I sobbed, grabbing her halter, trying to keep her head down so she would not hurt herself more. Stay down, baby, please, stay down. She was sweating profusely, her coat soaked in seconds. The pain was sending her into shock. Her gums were pale, almost white. My inner monologue went silent. There were no words, just a white-hot blinding rage and a grief so deep it felt like I was drowning. Then, the wailing started. It was not the horse. It was Mark. He was lying on the concrete, clutching his lower back, rolling side to side like a toddler having a tantrum. My back, he screamed, his voice echoing off the metal roof. She threw me. That crazy beast tried to kill me. My back is broken. Help. I looked up from my dying horse. Tears were streaming down my face, hot and salty. I looked at the man lying 5 feet away. He was moving his legs. He was twisting his torso. He was clearly not paralyzed. He was not even bleeding. You monster, I whispered, the words scraping my throat. Mark saw me looking at him. He stopped rolling for a second, his eyes narrowing. Then he pointed a shaking finger at me. You did this, he yelled, his face turning a blotchy red. You spooked her. You came screaming in here and made her throw me. I am going to sue you. I am going to take everything. He was already building his narrative. He was lying on the ground, next to the animal whose spine he had just snapped in half, and he was calculating his lawsuit. I stood up. My hands were covered in Sarah's sweat and the foam from her mouth. I walked over to where my phone had fallen in the straw. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely unlock the screen. I did not call 911 for him. I dialed the vet. Hello? Dr. Miller? I choked out. my voice breaking into a sob. It is Sophie. It is Sarah. She, Hao Ling. 2# is greater than her back. It is gone. Please hurry. Behind me. Mark was still screaming, calling for help, calling for a lawyer, calling me names. But I turned my back on him. I knelt back down beside Sarah's head and stroked her velvet nose, weeping into her mane. I am sorry, I whispered to her. I am so sorry. I stayed there, holding her heavy head in my lap, listening to the man who murdered her scream about his own imaginary pain, waiting for the sound of my father's truck to return to a world that had been irrevocably destroyed. The sound of the ambulance siren cut through the humid afternoon air, drowning out the frantic beating of my own heart. It was a chaotic, dissonant symphony that seemed to signal the end of my life as I knew it. I was still kneeling in the sawdust, my jeans soaked with the sweat and urine of my dying horse, while Mark lay on the concrete aisle a few feet away, performing the greatest act of his life. My father, David, had arrived 2 minutes before the paramedics. I had never seen a man age 10 years in 10 seconds until that moment. He had run into the barn, his face pale, dropping the bag of medication he had just bought. He looked from Sarah, who was thrashing weakly on the ground with her hindquarters paralyzed, to Mark, who was screaming about lawsuits and spinal cords. David, Mark bellowed, clutching his back with theatrical agony. Your daughter, she is crazy. She tried to kill me. Dad, Frosa. He looked at me, his eyes wide and bewildered. I opened my mouth to defend myself, to scream the truth about the mounting block and the saddle, but the words stuck in my throat like shards of glass. He wrote a here. I finally choked out, pointing a trembling finger at Mark. Dad. He climbed on her back. He broke her spine. Liar. Mark shrieked, his face contorted in a mask of pain that looked suspiciously practiced. I was checking her water bucket. I was trying to help. She came in here screaming like a banshee, banging on the walls. She spooked the horse on purpose. She wanted the beast to trample me. It was a lie so audacious, so completely divorced from reality, that it momentarily stunned me into silence. Mark was using a tactic I would later learn was called DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. In his twisted version of events, I was the villain, and he was the innocent stepfather trying to do a good deed. Before Dad could respond, the paramedics rushed in, their heavy boots thudding on the floor. My mother, Linda, was right behind them. She must have arrived while I was tending to Sarah. She did not look at the horse. She did not look at me. She ran straight to Mark, throwing herself down beside him in her designer dress. Oh my God. Mark, Linda wailed. What did she do to you? She set the animal on me. Linda, Mark gasped, gripping her hand. I cannot feel my legs. I think I am paralyzed. The paramedics swarmed around him, asking questions, checking vitals. I watched from the shadows of the stall, feeling a cold isolation settle over me. My father was standing in the middle of the aisle, looking lost. He should have been screaming at Mark. He should have been defending me, but he was a man broken by debt and stress. And in the face of this overwhelming chaos, he crumbled. Dad, look at the saddle, I whispered, pointing to the equipment lying in the dust. Why would there be a saddle if he was checking water? But nobody was listening. The narrative had already been written, and I was being edited out of the truth. Linda stood up and marched over to me, Her face was twisted with a rage I had never seen before. She did not look like my mother. She looked like a stranger defending her territory. "You spiteful little girl," she hissed, her voice low so the paramedics would not hear. "You have always hated him, but to use a horse as a weapon? You are going to rot in jail for this." I did not have the energy to argue. I looked past her at the paramedics, lifting Mark onto the stretcher. "Careful," Mark groaned. "My spine, it feels like it is shattered." As they lifted him, the sheet covering his legs slipped slightly. I saw it. It was subtle, a movement so small that only someone watching with the intense, hyper-aware focus of trauma would notice. Mark adjusted his right foot. He flexed his ankle to keep his shoe from falling off. A paralyzed man cannot flex his ankle. My inner monologue shifted from grief to a cold, razor-sharp fury. He is lying. He is lying about everything, and he is going to destroy us. I reached into my back pocket and pulled out my phone. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to be steady. I opened the camera app. I did not care about privacy laws. I did not care about decency. I needed a weapon. I started recording. I filmed the paramedics strapping him down. I filmed my mother hovering over him, crying fake tears. And then I caught the moment that would seal my fate. As they wheeled him past the stall where Sarah lay dying, Mark thought he was in the clear. He thought everyone's attention was on the stretcher. He looked over at Linda, and for a split second, the mask of agony dropped. He winked. It was a quick, conspiratorial wink, followed by a subtle adjustment of his hips on the stretcher to get comfortable. I stopped recording. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The sirens wailed again as they sped away, taking the monster and his enabler with them. Silence returned to the barn, but it was not empty. It was filled with the ragged breathing of my horse. The vet, Dr. Miller, pulled up a minute later. I knew what was coming. I knew what had to be done. Dad walked over to me. He looked at the phone in my hand, then at the horse. "Sophie," he said, his voice sounding hollow and far away. "Tell me the truth. Did you scare the horse?" The question hit me harder than Mark's elbow had. My own father doubted me. The gaslighting had worked. It had seeped into his brain and poisoned his trust. I looked at him, feeling a wall of ice build up around my heart. "Look at her back, Dad," I said quietly. "Just look at her back." I turned away from him. I walked out of the barn, into the blinding sunlight that felt offensive given the darkness in my soul. I sat on the hood of my truck and opened TikTok. My thumb hovered over the video I had just taken. I added a caption. I did not think about the legal ramifications. I did not think about defamation. I did not think about the future. I only thought about the fire burning in my chest and the need to burn them back. My stepfather just broke my horse's back for fun. Now he is faking paralysis to sue us. Watch his foot move at the end. Sao ting hao ling. Deve. I hit post. I sat there, staring at the screen as the upload bar completed its journey. 100%. I did not know it then, but I had just lit a fuse that would blow up my entire life. Inside the barn, the vet was opening his medical bag, preparing the syringe that would stop Sarah's heart. Outside, under the uncaring blue sky, I waited for the world to see the monster my mother had brought into our home. 1 week had passed since the incident in the barn, and the farmhouse felt less like a home and more like a mausoleum waiting for its ghosts. The air was thick with a silence so heavy it felt tangible, pressing against my eardrums, interrupted only by the occasional ring of the landline that my father refused to answer. Sarah was still alive, but barely. She was suspended in a sling in the recovery stall, a complex web of pulleys and canvas straps keeping her paralyzed hindquarters off the ground to prevent pressure sores. Her eyes, once bright and curious, were now dull and glazed with high doses of painkillers. Every time I walked into the barn, the smell of antiseptic and decay hit me, a sensory reminder that we were merely delaying the inevitable. My father, David, had retreated into himself. He spent his days sitting at the kitchen table, staring at piles of unpaid bills, his coffee cup untouched and cold. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out from the inside. Then came the knock on the door. It was not a friendly knock. It was sharp, authoritative, and demanding. I watched from the top of the stairs as Dad opened the heavy oak door. A stranger stood there, a man in a cheap gray suit holding a thick manila envelope. He did not smile. He did not offer condolences. "David Bennett?" the man asked. "Yes," my father whispered. "You have been served." The man thrust the envelope into my father's chest and turned on his heel, marching back to his unmarked sedan without another word. Dad closed the door and leaned his back against it, sliding down until he hit the floor. He did not open the envelope. He just held it like it was a bomb. I walked down the stairs, the wood creaking under my feet. I sat on the floor next to him and took the envelope from his trembling hands. I ripped the seal open. The sound of tearing paper was the loudest thing in the room. It was a lawsuit. Plaintiff, Mark Reynolds. Defendants, David Bennett and Sophie Bennett. I scanned the legal jargon, my eyes blurring as the words swam before me. Gross negligence, reckless endangerment, harboring a known dangerous animal, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and then the number $500,000. I stared at the words, written out in black and white, $500,000. Mark was suing us for $500,000 for the back injury he sustained while trespassing on our property and murdering my horse. He wants the farm, Dad said, his voice barely audible. He knows we do not have the cash. He wants to force a liquidation. My inner monologue turned cold and sharp. He does not just want the farm. He wants to erase us. He wants to pave over our lives with his debt and his greed. I felt a vibration in my pocket. I pulled out my phone, half expecting it to be a lawyer. But it was an email notification. The sender name made my stomach lurch. Mom. I had tried calling her a dozen times over the last week. Straight to voicemail. My texts went undelivered. She had blocked her own daughter. But now, she had something to say. I opened the email. There was no subject line. Saützinghalling. Zwei Raute ist größer als Sophie. I hope you are happy. I am sitting here in the hospital waiting room while Mark undergoes yet another MRI. The doctors say his spine is traumatized. He may never walk without pain again. And to think, this is all because you could not control that vicious animal. We have seen the video you posted online. How dare you? How dare you try to ruin the reputation of a man who has done nothing but try to help our family? You are a vindictive, ungrateful child. Mark is willing to drop the criminal charges if you agree to the settlement. Tell your father to sell the farm. It is the only way to make this right. You owe Mark this. You owe me this. Do not make us take you to court and destroy what little dignity you have left. Fix this, Sophie, or do not bother contacting me ever again. Saützinghalling. Dva. Mom. I read the email twice. I looked for a shred of concern for me. I looked for a question about how I was coping. I looked for a mention of Sarah. the horse she used to feed carrots to on Sunday mornings. There was nothing, just a demand for money and a threat. I looked up at my father. He was weeping silently, his face buried in his rough, calloused hands. He was broken. He believed the lie because the lie was louder than the truth. He believed we were at fault because the woman he once loved told him so. I stood up. The floorboards felt solid beneath my feet for the first time in days. The grief that had been drowning me began to recede, replaced by something harder, something combustible. They wanted a villain? Fine, I would be the villain. I walked into the kitchen and poured the cold coffee down the sink. I watched the dark liquid swirl down the drain, carrying away the last of my childhood innocence. I am not selling the farm. Dad, I said. He looked up at me, his eyes red and swollen. Sophie, we have no choice. We cannot fight a lawsuit. We do not have money for a lawyer. We do not need money, I said, my voice steady. We need the truth. I did not tell him about the plan forming in my head. I did not tell him that I was done crying. I walked out the back door and headed toward the barn, not to mourn, but to think. Mark wanted a war. He wanted to use the legal system as a weapon to strip us of everything we owned. He thought he was dealing with a scared teenage girl and a broken man. He thought he had won because he had the loudest voice and the most audacious lies. But as I walked past the paddock where Sarah used to run, I made a silent vow. I would not just defend myself. I would hunt him. I would turn over every stone in his miserable life until I found the rot underneath. I pulled my phone out again and looked at the email one last time before hitting delete. Goodbye, Mom. I thought you chose your side. The sun was setting, casting long, blood-red shadows across the grass. The farm looked beautiful and tragic in the dying light. I took a deep breath of the cooling air. It smelled of earth and horses and impending rain. I was ready to dig. The end did not come with a bang or a dramatic final struggle. It came with a terrifying stillness that was far worse than the screaming. It was Tuesday morning, exactly 1 week after Mark had crushed my world under his weight. The veterinarian, Dr. Miller, stood in the center of the aisle, his face grave and lined with exhaustion. He had been coming out every day, trying every cocktail of steroids and anti-inflammatories available to modern medicine. But Sarah had stopped eating. She had stopped drinking. The spark in her large, liquid brown eyes had been extinguished, replaced by a dull, milky haze of suffering. The sling that held her up was causing massive pressure sores on her belly. Her hind legs were cold to the touch, the circulation failing. She was rotting while she was still breathing. Dr. Miller took off his cap and ran a hand through his thinning gray hair. He looked at my father, then at me. We are out of options, David, he said softly, to keep her going like this. Sayyiting Haling, Tuhash is greater than it is cruelty. She is in agony, even with the morphine. It is time to let her go. My father nodded. He did not speak. He could not. He just turned away and walked out of the barn, his shoulders shaking. He could not watch. He was a man who had lost his wife to another man, his savings to the bank, and now he was losing the last symbol of hope he had left. I did not leave. I could not leave her alone with strangers in her final moments. I walked into the stall. The smell was heavy, a mix of sawdust, sweet feed, and the acrid scent of betadine. I knelt by Sarah's head. She did not lift it. Her breathing was shallow, a ragged rasp that rattled in her chest. I am here. Girl, I whispered, pressing my forehead against her neck. It is okay. You can go now. You do not have to fight for us anymore. Dr. Miller stepped in quietly. He had 2 syringes. The first one is a sedative, he explained, his voice gentle. She will just fall asleep. The second one stops the heart. She will not feel a thing. I nodded, tears streaming down my face. Hot and fast, I held her halter with both hands, grounding her, grounding myself. I watched the pink liquid disappear into the vein in her neck. Sarah let out a long, deep sigh, the kind of breath you take when you finally lay down after a long, hard journey. Her eyelids fluttered and closed. The tension that had held her body rigid for 7 days dissolved. Her head grew heavy in my lap. Goodbye, my beautiful girl. I choked out. The second injection followed. I waited. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds, and then nothing. The chest stopped rising. The warmth began to fade. Retreating inward, the barn fell into a silence so profound it felt like the world had stopped spinning. Sarah was gone. The creature that had been my confidant, my teammate, and my best friend was now just a shell of copper hair and bone. Dr. Miller squeezed my shoulder. I will call the removal service. Sophie, take your time. He left me there. I sat with her for an hour, stroking her cold neck, memorizing the swirl of hair on her forehead. But as the minutes ticked by, the grief began to curdle. It thickened and hardened in my chest, transforming from a liquid sorrow into a solid, jagged stone of hatred. Mark had done this. He had not just caused an accident. He had looked at this magnificent, living creature and seen a toy to be broken. And while I was holding her dead body, he was likely sitting in a climate-controlled room, eating a sandwich, and planning how to spend the money he would get from suing us. I stood up, my knees cracked. I felt old. I wiped my face with the back of my sleeve, but the tears had stopped. I felt dry. I felt parched. I walked out of the stall and closed the door. I could not look back. I needed a distraction. I needed something to do with my hands before I burned the whole world down. I walked toward the tack room at the end of the aisle. It was a mess of leather straps, saddle pads, and cleaning supplies. And there, shoved into the corner behind a stack of winter blankets, was a black leather backpack. Hauling. Zwei Raude ist größer als I froze. It belonged to Mark. In the chaos of the ambulance ride, when the paramedics were rushing him out and my mother was screaming, nobody had thought to grab his personal effects. It had been sitting there for a week, gathering dust, a forgotten artifact of the invasion. I stared at it. A moral voice in the back of my head whispered about privacy, about not sinking to his level. I told that voice to shut up. I grabbed the bag. It was heavy. I unzipped the main compartment. It smelled like him, that cloying mix of musk and stale mints. Inside, there was a tablet, a change of clothes that looked too expensive for a casual visit, and a thick, blue plastic folder. I pulled the folder out. It was bulging with papers. I sat down on a hay bale, my hands trembling not from sadness, but from adrenaline. I opened it. The first few pages were mundane, printouts of sports betting odds, a receipt for a steak dinner in Louisville for $300, dated 2 days before they arrived at our farm, a foreclosure notice for a condo in Florida. So, he was broke. That was not a surprise. Entitled men often lived beyond their means. But then, I turned the page, and the air left my lungs. It was a document from a company called Equine Assurance Group, policy number 0-290-X. Insured property. Thoroughbred mare, Sarah's legacy. Coverage amount, $150,000. Policy type, full mortality and loss of use. I blinked, trying to make the words make sense. Mark had taken out an insurance policy on Sarah, but that was impossible. You cannot insure a car you do not own. You cannot insure a house you do not live in. I looked closer at the date. The policy was effective starting 30 days ago. My eyes scanned down to the bottom of the page, searching for the owner's authorization. And there it was, David Bennett. But it was not my father's signature. My father wrote in a jagged, hurried scrawl, the result of a wrist broken years ago, breaking a colt. This signature was looped, careful, and hesitant. It was a tracing. It was a forgery. And right below it, in the line marked primary beneficiary, was the name, Mark Reynolds. The room spun. I had to grip the edge of the hay bale to keep from falling. He had not just been reckless. He had not just been stupid. This was premeditated. He had insured the horse a month ago. He knew Sarah was injured and recovering. He knew she was vulnerable. He had come here with a plan. He did not ride her to prove a point. He rode her to kill her. He needed her dead to collect the $150,000. The lawsuit against my father was just the cherry on top, a way to get the land and the insurance money. He was going to get paid twice for the same murder. I flipped the page, my fingers shaking so hard I nearly ripped the paper. Behind the insurance policy was another document. This one was from a bank. It was a home equity line of credit agreement. Borrower, Linda Bennett Reynolds. Collateral, 142 Maple Drive. That was my mother's house. The house she had kept after the divorce. The house she was so proud of. I looked at the numbers. Mark had taken out a second mortgage on her home for $80,000. The funds had been dispersed 3 months ago. And where had the money gone? I found a printout of a cryptocurrency exchange account tucked in the back pocket of the folder. Account balance, $0.42. Loss to date, $79,800. The picture was complete. It was a mosaic of greed and desperation. Mark had gambled away my mother's home on digital coins. He was drowning in debt. He needed a lifeline. So he looked at his wife's ex-husband, saw a struggling farm with a valuable horse, and decided to cash it in. He was a leech, a parasite. I looked up from the papers. The barn was silent. Sarah was dead in the next stall, her body cooling in the shadows. But the grief was gone. It had been incinerated by the white-hot revelation in my hands. I closed the folder carefully. I put it back in the backpack. I zipped it up. I could have run to the police right then. I could have run to my father. But something stopped me. If I went to the police now, Mark would claim it was a misunderstanding. He would claim he had power of attorney. He would find a loophole. He was slippery. He was a con artist. No, I needed more. I needed him to hang himself. I needed him to stand in front of a judge, under oath, and lie. I needed him to be so confident in his victory that he would walk right into the trap. I stood up and slung the backpack over my shoulder. It felt heavy, but it was a good weight. It was the weight of ammunition. I walked out of the tack room and down the aisle. I stopped one last time at Sarah's stall. I did not open the door. I just pressed my hand against the wood. I know why you died now, I whispered to the silence. And I promise you, he will pay for every single dollar he thought you were worth. I walked out of the barn and into the blinding sunlight. My father was sitting on the porch steps, his head in his hands. He looked up as I approached. "Is it done?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Yes," I said, "it is done." He looked at me, expecting to see a broken child, but I was not broken anymore. I was forged. I did not tell him about the backpack. I did not tell him about the insurance. I just sat down next to him and stared at the long, empty driveway. Let him sue us. "Dad," I said quietly. David looked at me, confused. "What?" "Sophie, we cannot. Let him take us to court." I interrupted, my voice as cold as the grave. I would soon dig for my horse. Let him think he has won. Let him come for everything. Because when he does, I thought, I will be waiting. The days following Sarah's death were a blur of gray skies and administrative grief. We buried her in the pasture behind the barn, under the old oak tree where she used to stand in the shade during the hottest parts of July. The backhoe operator my father hired did his job quickly, leaving a mound of fresh, dark earth that stood out like a scar against the green grass. My father could not look at it. He walked past the grave with his head down, his eyes fixed on his boots. A man defeated by the weight of his own perceived failure. He believed the narrative that had been forced upon him. He believed he was negligent. He believed we were at risk of losing everything because we were in the wrong. But I was not mourning anymore. Grief is a heavy, suffocating blanket, but rage is fuel. It burns clean and hot. I spent 48 hours in my bedroom, not sleeping, but studying. I was not studying for my high school finals. I was studying Mark. I had his backpack. I had the insurance papers. I had the bank statements showing he had bled my mother dry. But I knew it was not enough. In the American legal system, paper trails can be explained away. A good lawyer could argue that Mark bought the insurance policy out of benevolence to protect the family asset. They could argue the signature was authorized verbally. They could argue the crypto losses were just bad investment advice. I needed something visceral. I needed the voice of the devil admitting he was a sinner. I needed him to confess. It was Thursday evening. The house was quiet. Dad was asleep in his armchair downstairs, a bottle of whiskey on the floor beside him. A new habit that terrified me almost as much as the lawsuit. I sat at my desk. My phone lay in front of me like a loaded weapon. I had downloaded a call recording application. I had tested it 3 times to ensure it captured both sides of the conversation clearly. I took a deep breath. I had to become someone else. I had to shed the skin of the angry, defiant daughter who had screamed at him in the barn. I had to become the broken, scared child he wanted me to be. Narcissists like Mark do not respond to aggression. They respond to submission. They feed on it. If I wanted him to drop his guard, I had to offer him my throat. I dialed his number. The ringing sound was slow and rhythmic, matching the pounding of my pulse. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3 rings. Soi Jing Haoling. Emma Jore. Hello. His voice was gruff, impatient. I could hear the background noise of a television and the clinking of silverware. He was probably eating dinner at a hotel, likely paid for with a credit card he had opened in my mother's name. "Mark?" I asked, making my voice small and trembling. "It is Sophie." There was a pause, a long, heavy silence where I could feel him assessing the situation. Well, he said, his tone shifting instantly to one of smug superiority. The prodigal stepdaughter calls. To what do I owe the pleasure? Are you calling to scream at me again? Because my lawyer advised me not to speak to you. No, I whispered. I forced a sob into my throat. It tasted like bile. No, Mark, I am not calling to scream. I am calling to Saoyuting Haling. 2 hashes greater than to apologize. Another pause. He was listening now. The bait was in the water. Apologize? He repeated, savoring the word. For what? Exactly? For everything. I said. I let the tears I had been holding back for days leak into my voice. But I twisted them. I was not crying for my horse. I was crying for his ego. I was wrong. Mark, I should not have yelled at you. I know you were just trying to help. And Xiao Yu Hao Ling, 2 hashes greater than, and Sarah is dead. I paused, letting the silence hang. She is dead? Mark asked. His voice did not sound sad. It sounded sharp, interested. When? 2 days ago. I said. The vet had to put her down. She was in too much pain. I heard a sound on the other end of the line. A sharp exhale. It sounded like relief. It is for the best, Mark said, his mouth full of food. That animal was dangerous. It is a tragedy, of course. But honestly, Sophie, it saves your father a lot of money in feed bills. He was already rationalizing it, but I needed more. I needed him to talk about the injury. I needed him to talk about the money. Dad is a mess. I continued, pressing the phone harder against my ear. He received the lawsuit papers. Mark, please, we do not have $500,000. If you proceed with this, we will lose the farm. We will be homeless. Can we not work something out? Mom says you are paralyzed. Is it Xiao Yu Haling? 2 hashes greater than, is it really that bad? This was the pivot point. I was appealing to his power. I was giving him total control over our fate. Mark Sihil, a long, exaggerated sound of martyrdom. Sophie, sweetheart, you have to understand. My back is ruined. The doctors say I might need surgery. The pain is excruciating. I can barely get out of bed. I need that money for my medical care and for the trauma. It is not about greed. It is about justice. I squeezed my eyes shut. Liar. My inner monologue hissed. I saw you walking in the garden on the video I took yesterday. I saw you bending down to pick up a quarter. I know, I said softly. I am so sorry I caused this. I feel so guilty. I just want to fix it. Dad is talking about selling the land to a developer. He says it is the only way to pay you. I mentioned the sale deliberately. I knew he needed cash, not land. Land took time to sell. Insurance payouts were faster. Wait, Mark said quickly. Selling the land? That could take months. The market is soft right now. He sounded agitated. He was doing the math in his head. I do not know what else to do. I said, unless Saoyuting Haling, 2 hashes greater than unless there was another way. Mark lowered his voice. The background noise of the television faded, as if he had muted it. He was moving in for the kill. Listen to me, Sophie, he said, his tone dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You are a smart girl. You know your father is incompetent with money. That is why I had to step in. I tried to secure things for the family. What do you mean? I asked. Playing dumb, I took steps, he said vaguely. Financial protections. But now that the horse is dead, Xiao Yu Haling, 2 hash, is greater than well. That actually simplifies things. My heart hammered against my ribs. Say it. I willed him. Say it, you son of a bitch. Simplifies things how? I asked. Mark chuckled. It was a dark, wet sound. Let us just say that horse was worth more as a carcass than she was as a cripple. I made sure of it. I held my breath. He was skirting the edge of a confession. You mean, 小玉好灵, 2 hashes greater than like insurance? I ventured, making my voice sound confused. But Dad said he canceled the policy last year because we could not afford the premiums. Mark laughed out loud now. He was drunk on his own cleverness. He thought he was talking to a defeated child who knew nothing about the world. Your father is a fool. Sophie, he does not know how to play the game. I took out a policy on her a month ago. A big one, $150,000. And since I am the beneficiary, 小玉好灵, 2 hash is greater than well. Let us just say your father's debt to me is about to be significantly reduced. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine. He had admitted it. He had admitted to the policy, but I needed him to admit the fraud. But, Mark, I asked, my voice trembling with fake anxiety, how did you get a policy? Dad owns the horse. Does not the owner have to sign? Mark snorted. Details. Sophie, details. I signed it for him. He was too busy moping around to handle business. So I handled it. It is called taking initiative. And now, thanks to my foresight, I am going to get a check that will clear up a lot of problems. 小玉好灵, 2 hash is greater than, gotcha. He had just admitted to forgery. He had admitted to insurance fraud. And he had admitted that the horse's death was financially beneficial to him. But I had one more card to play. I needed to nail him on the injury. So, 小玉好灵, 2 hash is greater than if you get the insurance money. Will you drop the lawsuit? I asked, because if you are really paralyzed, you will need more than that. Mark's voice changed. It became arrogant, dismissive, paralyzed. He scoffed. Look, I am hurting. Sure, but between you and me, I will be playing golf in a month. The wheelchair is just for the courtroom. Sweetheart, it is theater. You have to put on a show if you want the judge to pay attention. But do not you dare tell your mother that. She likes taking care of me. I closed my eyes and let out a long, silent exhale. I had it. I had everything. The forgery, the motive, the fake injury, the admission of manipulating my mother. You are so smart. Mark, I said, my voice dripping with a sarcasm he was too narcissistic to detect. You really thought of everything. I try. He said, now, go tell your dad to stop worrying about the lawsuit. Once that insurance check clears, maybe I will be generous and let him keep the house. We will see. Thank you. And Mark, I said, you have no idea how much this helps. 小玉好灵. 2. I hung up. My hand was shaking as I pressed the stop recording button. A file name popped up on the screen. Recording _001. I renamed it. The end of Mark. I sat back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving behind a cold, hard clarity. I felt dirty, listening to him, playing his game, feeding his ego. It made me feel like I needed to scrub my skin with steel wool. But I had the weapon. I saved the file to my phone. Then I emailed it to myself. Then I uploaded it to a cloud drive. Then I put it on a USB stick. I stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the night was black and absolute. The farm was silent. There was no sound of hooves in the barn. There was no soft whinny greeting me. He thought he had won. He thought he had just consolidated his power over a weak, stupid family. He thought he was going to walk away with $150,000 of blood money and a settlement for a fake injury. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. I did not look like a 17-year-old girl anymore. My eyes were shadowed. My jaw was set. I am not going to just show this to a lawyer. I whispered to the empty room. Lawyers made deals. Lawyers settled out of court. Lawyers kept things quiet. Mark loved attention. He loved being the center of the story. He loved theater, as he called it. Well, I was going to give him the performance of a lifetime. I turned away from the window and walked out of my room. I went downstairs to where my father was sleeping. I gently took the whiskey bottle from the floor and placed it on the table. Wake up, Dad, I said softly, shaking his shoulder. He groaned, his eyes fluttering open, red and glassy. Sophie, what is it? Is something wrong? No, Dad, I said, for the first time in a long time. Everything is right. I sat down across from him. We are not selling the farm, I said, and we are not settling the lawsuit. He looked at me, confused, rubbing his face. Sophie, we talked about this. We have to. No, I interrupted. We are going to the mediation hearing next week. We are going to let him sit there in his wheelchair. We are going to let him make his speech. And then, Sao Yu Tsing Haoling, 2 hashes greater than we are going to burn him alive. I pulled my phone out of my pocket and placed it on the table between us. Listen, I said. I pressed play. Mark's voice filled the kitchen, loud and arrogant and damning. I watched my father's face as he listened. I saw the confusion turn to shock. I saw the shock turn to horror. And finally, slowly, I saw the spark of life return to his eyes. It was not happiness. It was fury. When the recording finished, the silence in the kitchen was electric. David looked at me. He looked at the phone. He looked at the empty chair where my mother used to sit. He forged my name. He whispered, Sao Yu Tsing Haoling. Yes, yes, he is faking the paralysis. Sao Yu Tsing Haoling. Get to. Yes. David stood up. He did not look like a beaten man anymore. He looked like the man who used to break wild stallions. He looked like a father who realized someone had tried to hurt his child. Call the lawyer, he said, his voice steady and hard as granite. Tell him we accept the mediation meeting. Tell him we will be there. I smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile. We are going to do more than that. Dad, I said, we are going to make sure everyone sees it. The conference room at the law firm of Stevenson and Associates smelled of lemon polish and intimidation. It was a room designed to make poor people feel small. The table was a long, polished slab of mahogany that seemed to stretch for miles, separating the winners from the losers. On one side sat my father and me, accompanied by Mr. Henderson, a court-appointed lawyer whose suit was 2 sizes too big and who smelled faintly of mothballs. On the other side sat the enemy. The door opened with a dramatic swoosh, and the performance began. My mother, Linda, entered first. She was holding the door open, her face a mask of tragic devotion. Then came the wheelchair. Mark was wheeled in by a paralegal. He was a masterpiece of manufactured suffering. He wore a foam neck brace that pushed his chins upward, making him look like a strangled toad. A tartan blanket was draped over his legs, concealing the limbs I had watched him use perfectly well on my security camera footage just 24 hours ago. He groaned as the wheelchair bumped over the threshold. A low, pained sound that made my mother rush to his side to adjust his pillow. Easy, honey, Linda cooed, stroking his forehead. We are almost there. Just be brave. I watched them with a cold, detached fascination. My inner monologue was not screaming anymore. It was taking notes. Look at the way he winces only when the lawyer looks at him. Look at the way he grips the armrest. Not in pain, but in anticipation. Mark's lawyer, a man named Sterling, who had a smile like a shark, opened his briefcase. He did not look at us. He looked at his watch. Let us make this quick, Sterling said, smoothing out his tie. My client is in severe physical distress. He has sustained a catastrophic injury to his lumbar spine due to the negligence of your clients. We are here to discuss the terms of the settlement before we file the formal motion for asset seizure. My father sat rigid in his chair. His hands were clenched into fists on the table, his knuckles white. He looked at Mark, and for the first time in years, there was no fear in his eyes. There was only disgust. Asset seizure, my father said, his voice low and gravelly. You mean my farm. It is the only asset you have with enough equity to cover the damages. Sterling replied smoothly, $500,000 for medical bills, pain and suffering, and loss of future earnings. Mr. Reynolds can no longer work. He requires full-time care. Mark let out a pathetic cough. It breaks my heart. David, he rasped, turning his head stiffly to look at my father. I never wanted this. I tried to help you. I tried to save that dangerous animal. And this is how I am repaid? Crippled by a beast you should have put down years ago. Linda, she met in, her voice trembling with righteous indignation. She glared at me across the table. You should be ashamed of yourself. Sophie, she spat. Look at him. Look at what you did. He is your stepfather. He clothed you. He fed you. And you let that monster trample him. I sat there, awe silent. I let her words wash over me. Keep talking. I thought, dig the hole deeper. Mr. Henderson, our lawyer, cleared his throat nervously. He reached for his water glass. Perhaps we could discuss a payment plan. He began. My client is willing to. Sauting hao ling e maggiore di no. I said. The word cut through the room like a knife. Mr. Henderson stopped mid-sentence. Sterling looked up, annoyed. Mark stopped groaning for a second. Excuse me? Sterling asked. We are not discussing a payment plan. I said. Standing up, I smoothed down my skirt. I felt remarkably calm. My heart was beating a slow, steady rhythm, because there are no damages to pay. Sophie, sit down, my mother hissed. Do not make this worse. I ignored her. I walked over to the end of the table where a large flat-screen television was mounted on the wall for presentations. I pulled a USB drive from my pocket. Mr. Reynolds claims he is paralyzed. I said, plugging the drive into the laptop connected to the screen. He claims my horse attacked him. He claims he is a victim. I clicked the mouse. The screen flickered to life. It was a video. The timestamp in the corner read yesterday, 3:30 in the afternoon. The image was crisp and clear. It showed the back garden of my mother's house. The patio door opened, and out walked Mark. He was not in a wheelchair. He was not wearing a neck brace. He was wearing cargo shorts and a t-shirt. He walked with a steady, heavy stride. He walked over to the patio table, picked up a beer, and then bent down, bending at the waist, to pick up a golf ball that was lying on the grass. He tossed the ball in the air and caught it. He took a swig of beer. He did a little stretch, twisting his torso left and right, limber as a willow branch. The silence in the conference room was absolute. It was a vacuum. On the screen, The mark in the video scratched his backside and laughed at something on his phone. In the room, the mark in the wheelchair turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. He pulled the blanket up higher, as if it could hide the truth. That Saoyuting Halin, 2 hashes greater than that is old footage. Mark stammered, his voice cracking. That is from last year. I paused the video. I pointed to the timestamp. November 25th. I read aloud. Yesterday, Sterling, the shark lawyer, stopped smiling. He looked at the screen. He looked at his client. He began to slowly close his folder. Linda was staring at the screen, her mouth slightly open. Mark, she whispered, you said, Saoyuting Hao, Ling. 2 hash is greater than you said you could not even go to the bathroom by yourself. I turned to face them. I was not done. That handles the injury, I said. Now, let us talk about the horse. I clicked the next file. It was an audio waveform. This is a recording of a phone call between myself and Mark Reynolds, taken 2 nights ago. I announced. I pressed play. Mark's voice boomed through the high-quality speakers of the conference room. It was arrogant, slurpy, and undeniable. Let us just say that horse was worth more as a carcass than she was as a cripple. I made sure of it. My mother gasped. She put a hand over her mouth. The recording continued. I took out a policy on her a month ago. A big one. $150,000. Saoyuting Hao Ling. 2 hashes greater than I signed it for him. It is called taking initiative. Sterling pushed his chair back. He stood up. I am recusing myself from this meeting, he said abruptly. He looked at Mark with pure venom. You did not tell me about the insurance policy. You did not tell me about the forgery. Sit down, Mark yelled, forgetting his neck brace, turning his head sharply to glare at his lawyer. She trapped me. It was entrapment. She tricked me into saying that. The recording played on. Relentless. The wheelchair is just for theater. You have to put on a show if you want the judge to pay attention. Mark scrambled to grab the remote on the table, trying to turn it off. The blanket fell from his legs. He stood up, actually stood up, out of the wheelchair to reach across the table. Saoyuting Halling. 2 Raute ist größer als he froze. We all looked at him, standing, on his 2 legs. In the middle of the room, the audio recording finished with my voice saying, thank you, Mark. Mark sank back into the wheelchair, but the illusion was shattered. He looked small. He looked sweaty. He looked like a rat caught in a trap that had just snapped shut. My father stood up slowly. He walked around the table. He stopped in front of Mark. You killed her, Dad said. His voice was not loud, but it carried the weight of a sledgehammer. You broke her back for money. Mark looked around the room, desperate. Linda, do not listen to this. It is doctored. It is AI. You know how good technology is these days. They faked my voice. Linda stood up. She was trembling, but she was not looking at Mark with pity anymore. She was looking at him with a dawning horror. I heard the rest of the recording. Mark, Linda said, her voice shaking. I heard you talking about the house. I had not played that part yet, but Linda knew. She knew because she had seen the bank statements I had anonymously mailed to her house that morning. I had made sure she received them before she left for this meeting. She just had not put the pieces together until now. You stole my house. Linda whispered. You took a second mortgage. You told me those papers were for tax refinancing. Mark's face crumbled. The arrogance evaporated, replaced by the pathetic, whining cowardice that was his true nature. Baby, please. I did it for us, he pleaded, reaching for her hand. I was going to pay it back. The crypto market is bouncing back. I just needed a little more time. The horse money was going to fix everything. Do not touch me, Linda screamed. She slapped his hand away. She backed away from him as if he were radioactive. You gambled away my home? You killed my daughter's horse? I stood by the screen, watching the implosion. It was ugly. It was messy. It was perfect. Mr. Sterling, Mark's lawyer, was already packing his briefcase. I am terminating my representation of Mr. Reynolds, effective immediately, he announced to the room. I will be notifying the court of a fraud upon the tribunal. He looked at Mark. Good luck, Mr. Reynolds. You are going to need it. Sterling walked out. The room was suddenly very big and very empty. Mark sat in his wheelchair. But he was no longer a king on a throne. He was a criminal in a chair. He looked at me. His eyes were full of hate. You little bitch. He hissed. You think you are so smart. You just ruined your mother's life too. You know that? I looked at him, and I felt nothing. No fear, no anger, just the cold satisfaction of a job finished. No, Mark, I said. I just saved what was left of it. I looked at my father. He nodded at me. He picked up the phone on the conference table. Who are you calling? Mark asked, panic rising in his voice. The police, Dad said. Mark tried to stand up again. Maybe to run, maybe to fight. But the door opened. 2 uniformed officers stood there. They had been waiting in the lobby. I had called them an hour ago. I had told them there was a man attempting to commit grand larceny and insurance fraud at this address. Mr. Reynolds? The first officer asked. Stepping into the room, we have a warrant for your arrest. Mark slumped back into the wheelchair. He did not fight. He did not run. He just looked at the floor, defeated by a 17-year-old girl and the ghost of a horse. As the officers moved in to handcuff him, I looked at my mother. She was sitting in a chair in the corner, sobbing into her hands. She had lost her husband. She had lost her house. She had lost her dignity. I wanted to feel sorry for her. I really did. But as I watched the handcuffs click around Mark's wrists, I remembered the way she had looked at me when Sarah died. I remembered how she had called me a spiteful little girl. My inner monologue whispered the final truth of the day. She made her choice. Now she has to live with the consequences. I unplugged the USB drive and put it back in my pocket. The show was over. The police cruisers pulled away from the curb, their red and blue lights reflecting off the glass facade of the office building like a chaotic strobe light. I stood on the sidewalk next to my father, watching them merge into the heavy afternoon traffic. Mark was in the back of one of those cars, handcuffed, humiliated, and heading toward a cell that would finally be small enough to contain his ego. I should have felt triumphant. I had done exactly what I set out to do. I had dismantled the man who tried to destroy us. I had exposed the fraud, saved the farm, and delivered retribution with surgical precision. But as the sirens faded into the distance, I did not feel like a winner. I felt hollow. I felt scraped clean, like the inside of a pumpkin carved out for Halloween. My inner monologue was quiet. The rage that had fueled me for the last 2 weeks had burned itself out, leaving behind only a pile of cold ash. Behind us, the heavy glass doors of the building opened. My mother, Linda, stumbled out. She looked like a woman who had survived a shipwreck only to drown in the shallow water. Her mascara was running in black rivulets down her cheeks. Her expensive blazer was rumpled. She was clutching her purse to her chest as if it contained the last fragments of her life. She stopped when she saw us. She looked at David. She looked at me. David, she choked out, her voice trembling. I did not know. You have to believe me. I did not know he was that sick. I did not know about the insurance. My father looked at her. For the first time in my life, I saw him look at her without love. He did not look angry. Either. He looked indifferent. It was a terrifying transformation. You knew he hated the horse. Linda, my father said quietly, you knew he was cruel to Sophie, and you knew he was spending money you did not have. You just did not care as long as he bought you nice things. Linda flinched as if he had slapped her. David, please. He stole my house. The lawyer said the bank is going to foreclose. He did not pay the mortgage for 6 months. He gambled it all away. I have nowhere to go. She took a step toward us, her hand reaching out. I watched her hand. It was manicured, soft, unaccustomed to labor. It was the hand of a woman who had chosen comfort over loyalty. Can I... Saoyuting Haling? 2 hash is greater than can I come back to the farm? Linda asked, her voice dropping to a whisper. Just for a while? Until I get back on my feet? We are family. David. I held my breath. I looked at my father. The old David, the beaten down man, would have said yes. He would have folded. He would have let the vampire back into the house because he was too kind to lock the door. But the man standing next to me had changed. He had listened to the recording of another man mocking his weakness. He had seen his daughter fight a war he should have fought. No, David said. The word hung in the air, solid and immovable. No? Linda repeated, blinking. But, Saoyuting Hal Ling, 2 hashes greater than where will I go? I do not know, David said, but you cannot go home with us. That home belongs to Sophie and me. You left it 5 years ago, and you tried to help Mark sell it out from under us today. But I was tricked, Linda wailed, looking around to see if anyone on the street was watching. I am a victim too. You are an accomplice, I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears, and flat, metallic, devoid of emotion. I stepped forward, meeting her gaze. You stood there and watched him lie about his back. Mom, you called me a liar when I told you he hurt Sarah. You chose him. You chose him every single day until the money ran out. You are only sorry now because you are broke. Sophie, how can you be so cruel? She sobbed. I am not cruel, I said. I am just accurate. I opened the passenger door of my father's truck. I climbed inside and closed the door. I did not look back at her. I stared straight ahead through the windshield as my father walked around to the driver's side, started the engine, and pulled away. We left her standing on the sidewalk, a solitary figure in a designer suit, surrounded by the wreckage of her own choices. The drive back to the farm was silent. Neither of us turned on the radio. We passed the miles, watching the Kentucky landscape roll by. The rolling hills, the white fences, the grazing horses that were still alive. When we turned into our driveway, the sun was beginning to set. The farmhouse looked different. It looked secure. The threat of the lawsuit was gone. The threat of foreclosure was gone. Mark would be facing felony charges for insurance fraud, forgery, and animal cruelty. The district attorney would have a field day with the evidence I had provided. But as the truck crunched over the gravel and came to a stop, my eyes drifted automatically to the barn. The door to Sarah's stall was closed. The red tape was gone. I got out of the truck and walked to the barn. I did not go inside. I just stood at the entrance, smelling the hay and the leather. I had won. Mark was going to prison. My mother was ruined. The farm was safe, but Sarah was still dead. The victory did not bring her back. The justice did not fix her spine. The satisfaction of seeing Mark in handcuffs did not fill the empty space in the stall where her warm breath used to be. I leaned my head against the rough wood of the doorframe and closed my eyes. A single tear leaked out, hot and slow. I realized then that revenge is not a healing act. It is a cauterizing one. It burns the wound shut so you do not bleed to death. But it leaves a scar that never truly fades. I had saved my father, and I had saved our home. But the price was a piece of my soul that I would never get back. I was 17 years old, and I felt ancient. My father walked up behind me. He did not say anything. He just placed his hand on my shoulder and squeezed. It was a heavy, grounding weight. "We have a lot of work to do," he said softly. I opened my eyes and looked at the empty paddock. "Yeah," I said, "we do." But as I looked at the darkening horizon, I knew the story was not quite over. There was one loose end, one final door that needed to be closed before I could truly move on. 6 months had passed since the sirens faded from our driveway. The seasons had turned, trading the biting frost of winter for the tentative, pale green of early spring. The farm was no longer drowning in silence. It was alive again, though the rhythm was different now. It was the rhythm of survival, steady and hard-earned. Mark was gone. He was currently serving a sentence of 3 to 5 years in a state penitentiary for insurance fraud and grand larceny. The plea deal he took was the only smart financial decision he had made in a decade. As for the lawsuit, it evaporated the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. We did not get a massive payout. Life is not a movie where the victims become millionaires overnight. But we kept the farm. The community, having seen the viral video and the news reports, rallied around us. A crowdfunding campaign raised enough to cover the legal fees and the overdue feed bills. We were bruised, but we were standing. I was in the kitchen helping my father go over the ledger when we saw the taxi pull up. It was a yellow cab from the city, 40 miles away. It idled at the gate for a long time before driving up to the house. I knew who it was before the door opened. My mother stepped out. Linda looked nothing like the woman who had sneered at me in the law office. The designer suits were gone, replaced by a faded wool coat that was 2 sizes too big. Her hair, once aggressively blonde and perfectly coiffed, was pulled back in a messy bun, showing streaks of gray at the temples. She dragged 2 battered suitcases out of the trunk. She did not walk to the door with entitlement this time. She walked with a shuffle, her head bowed against the wind. My father stood up from the table. He looked at me. His eyes were soft, filled with that dangerous, instinctive kindness that had almost destroyed us before. "Sophie," he said quietly, "she is your mother." "She was my mother," I corrected him. "Now, she is just a woman who made a bad bet." I walked to the front door and opened it. I did not step aside to let her in. I stood in the frame, blocking the warmth of the house from the chill of the afternoon. Linda looked up. Her eyes were red-rimmed and hollow. "Sophie," she whispered. Her voice cracked. "I have nowhere else to go. The bank took the house yesterday. They changed the locks. I slept at the bus station last night." She waited for me to move. She waited for the daughter she used to know, the one who craved her approval, to step back and open her arms. "Please," she continued, tears spilling over. "I know I messed up. I know Mark was. Soyudzinghaling. 2 hashes greater than a mistake. But I am family. You cannot turn your back on family." I looked at her suitcases. I looked at her shaking hands. My inner monologue was calm. There was no anger left, only a cold, clinical detachment. She is not sorry she hurt us. She is sorry she lost. If Mark had won, if he had gotten the money and kept the house, she would not be here. She would be laughing about us over cocktails. I reached into my back pocket. I had been carrying this card for weeks. Ever since the foreclosure notice on her house was made public, I knew this day would come. I held the card out to her. "What is this?" she asked, taking it with trembling fingers. "It is a shelter in Lexington," I said. "They have beds for women in transition. They have job placement programs. They can help you get back on your feet." Linda stared at the card, then up at me, her face twisting in disbelief. "A shelter?" she gasped. "You are sending your own mother to a homeless shelter?" I did not flinch. "You sent my horse to a slaughterhouse in your mind long before she died." "Mum," I said softly, "you watched a man break her back and you worried about his comfort. You watched him steal my inheritance and you worried about your lifestyle." "I am sorry," she wailed, dropping the suitcases. "I am sorry for all of it. Just let me come in. I will sleep on the floor. I will work in the barn. Please." "Sophie, I am afraid." My father appeared behind me. He looked at Linda, broken and weeping on the porch. He took a breath, about to speak, about to offer her a room, a meal, a second chance she did not deserve. I stepped back and grabbed the door handle, cutting him off before he could make a mistake. "We are not saving you." "Mom," I said, my voice final, "we are busy saving ourselves." I looked her in the eye one last time. "Good luck, Linda." I closed the door. I did not slam it. I just shut it firmly, the latch clicking into place with a sound that felt like the period at the end of a long, painful sentence. Through the window, I watched her stand there for a long time. Then, slowly, she picked up her suitcases and began walking back down the long driveway toward the main road. I turned back to the kitchen. My father was sitting at the table, his head in his hands. "Was that too hard?" he asked, his voice muffled. I walked over and sat across from him. I reached out and took his hand. "It was necessary," I said. We sat there in the quiet house. It was not a happy ending. There were no balloons, no victory lap. There was just the piece of a house that was no longer under siege. Outside, in the pasture, the wind blew through the empty space where Sarah used to run. We would get another horse one day. We would rebuild. But for now, the silence was enough. I had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, family is not about who you let in. It is about who you have the strength to keep out.